We are on page 83, Return to Ithaca. When Odysseus woke from the long, deep sleep that Athene had cast upon him, he found himself alone, lying under an olive tree and still wrapped in the bright cloaks in which he had lain down on board of Alcinous's galley, and all his rich gifts stacked about them. A thick morning mist spread by the bright-eyed goddess blotted out the shapes of land, that he might not know himself back on his own island and start out for his home before she could warn him of what was happening there. So he thought that the Phoenicians, top of 84, had set him aside in some strange place, and he checked over his treasure, drawing out the silver-hilted sword to sling over his shoulder, and fell to pacing up and down the shore while he thought of what he should do next. And there, on the seemingly empty tide line, Pallas Athene came to meet him in the guise of a young man, clad in a double mantle such as kings and nobles wore, and carrying a spear in his hand. "The greeting of the morning to you," said Odysseus, not knowing her. "I pray you, tell me, what land is this, and are the people friendly in these parts?" "Truly," said Athene, "you are simply in the head to ask such a question. This is the island of Ithaca, whose name is known even as far afield as Troy." Then a great joy woke in Odysseus at finding himself back in his own land. But he had been long away. I had no way of knowing what kind of men the children of 19 years ago had grown into, or what kind of greeting they would have for him. Maybe a new king sat in his place, who might not even be his son. So he did not tell the young man who he was, but said that he was a Cretan. And then, to explain how a man of Crete came to be on Ithaca with his treasure stacked round him under an olive tree, and yet not know where he was, he launched into some of his long and detailed stories, telling how in Crete one of the king's sons had tried to rob him of the rich spoils of war they had brought back from Troy, how in the fight for if he had slain the prince, and how in fear for his own life he had gathered up his treasure and escaped on board a trading ship of the Phoenicians, who had promised to put him ashore at Pylos. But the wind had blown them off course, and they had landed and slept here, and in the morning must have gone on their way, leaving him still asleep. And this young man laughed, and in that instant he was gone, and in his place stood bright-eyed Athene, stately and beautiful. "Oh, the cleverness of Odysseus," said she, mocking. "Yet you did not know me, who have so often helped you before Troy and again in the land of King Alcinous." Odysseus gave her a straight look, eye to eye. "But not when I had sore need of helping during my times of hideous danger at sea. Then how may I be sure that you now stand my friend? How can I even be sure that I indeed return to my own island?" Athene said, "How could I go against my father's brother Poseidon, lord of the sea, whose wrath was hot against you for the blinding of his son? But all that is past. Now you stand upon your own shore, and I am free to help you as I will. Look about you, and you will see that this is indeed your island." Top of 86. As she spoke, the gray cloud all about them rolled away as morning mist is drawn up by the sun, and Odysseus saw the familiar shapes of the bay within its headlands, the wooded upthrust of the mountains that rose almost from the shore, and little more than a bow shot away the cave of the sea nymphs, its entrance shielded by silvery-leaved olive trees. And with a heart that felt nearer to choking him, he flung himself down on his knees and kissed the sandy earth of home. But soon his joy turned to anger as Athene told him the sad state of the land that he had come back to, and the sorrows of Penelope, and how at present she had not even their young son to help her hold off the swarming suitors, for Telemachus was gone to seek news of his father from Menelaus and Helen of the fair cheeks. "Sweet lady, tell me what I must do, for my wits fail me," Odysseus cried, kneeling still with his face bowed into his hands. "First, let us hide all this treasure before men see it and start to wonder as its meaning," said Athene. And so they carried all the gold cups and fine garments into the cave, and she closed the entrance with a stone. Then she cast a spell of disguise upon Odysseus, so that his good clothes turned to rags, with a half-bald stag skin over all by way of a cloak, and she wrinkled his skin and made his eyes dull, so that he seemed again the beggar who had stolen into Troy to carry off its luck. Now, she bade him, go you across the island to the farm of Eumaeus, your swineherd. He is old now, but still loyal to you. Bide there among the pigs while I go fetch home Telemachus. And she was no longer there, only a quiver in the air behind her. And Odysseus turned his face toward the mountain tracks that led inland. When he reached the farm, Eumaeus was sitting in his doorway making himself a new pair of oxhide brogues. His dogs ran out, barking at the stranger with their hackles up, and would have attacked him, but that their master ran up and drove them off with a shower of stones. He greeted the seemingly beggar man kindly, and brought him into his own hut at the head of the farmyard, and gave him food and rough wine. Pause. This is a moment of Xenia, right? This guy is taking in what seems to be a beggar, feeding him, giving him water, clothing him, and not even asking who he is. So keep that in mind. This is an example of Xenia. And afterward, being glad of someone to talk to, he told him of the loss of the king, his master, and the haughtiness and greed of the young ruffians, making themselves at home in the palace and trying to force themselves upon the queen in marriage. The swineherd had loved his master, and the story had become a deep grievance with him, which in the way of old men he had told over and over again to anyone with ears to listen. Odysseus listened as well as he might, and when the story was over, he promised the old swineherd, top of 88, that his master was alive and he would soon be returning home, for he had heard of him in his own wanderings. Eumaeus did not believe him, for he thought that the beggar was only telling what he thought he would like to hear. But he listened courteously, and later, when the herd lads returned from the grazing land, driving the pigs before them, and it was time for supper, he fed him a good meal of roast pork, as much as he could eat, and afterward Odysseus amused them all with tales of the Trojan War until it was time to sleep.